Gettysburg had always been more than a historical fascination for me. It felt like a calling. The battlefield's haunting legacy and the weight of the lives lost drew me in time and again. This time, I joined a late-night ghost hunt, hoping to connect with the past in a way I never had before. As our group gathered under a pale moon near the infamous Devil's Den, a hush settled over us. The tour guide's voice, though steady, carried an unease that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. The battlefield stretched out in shadows, a solemn reminder of its bloody history. We began our slow walk across the battlefield, the flashlights barely piercing the oppressive darkness. Devil's Den loomed ahead, its jagged rocks illuminated by the moonlight. I felt compelled to step away from the group, lured by the eerie stillness of the surrounding area. I wandered a few paces to stand by a cluster of rocks, soaking in the atmosphere. The air felt heavy, almost electric. That's when I heard it, a sound so out of place that it froze me in my tracks. It was soft at first, barely audible over the whisper of the wind. But as I strained to listen, it grew clearer. Laughter. The unmistakable, carefree laughter of children. My breath caught in my throat. Why would children be here of all places in the dead of night? I turned toward the sound, and that's when I saw them. Two children, a boy and a girl, darting between the rocks as if playing hide and seek. They couldn't have been older than 7 or 8. Their clothes were tattered, clearly from another era, and their small forms seemed almost translucent.
Hello?
I called out, my voice shaky. They didn't respond. The boy peeked out from behind a rock, his eyes meeting mine for the briefest moment. There was something off about his gaze, something hollow, as though he were looking through me rather than at me. I stepped closer, heart pounding. Are you
lost? Do you need help? I asked. But just as I approached, they vanished, gone, as if they had never been there at all.
Followed by eerie silence. The laughter lingered, faint and disembodied, fading into the distance. My chest tightened, and I stumbled back to the group, my mind racing. When I told the guide what I had seen, she didn't look surprised. Instead, she nodded solemnly. You saw the children, they've been spotted before, she said. Some say they're the souls of camp followers, children who travelled with the soldiers. Others believe they were civilians caught in the crossfire. Either way, they've been here ever since, as if trapped in their final moments of innocence. Her words weighed heavily on me as we continued the tour. Though I tried to focus on her stories, my mind kept drifting back to the children's laughter and their fleeting spectral forms. Gettysburg wasn't just a battlefield. It was a living hell for everyone caught in its grasp. Among the soldiers were camp followers, families, wives and children who travelled with the armies. During the chaos of battle, these innocents often found themselves in harm's way. Graffiti, children I saw that night could have been casualties of this brutal reality. Perhaps they were playing when the cannons roared, their laughter silenced by the horrors of war. Or maybe they've remained here, echoes of a simpler, happier time, unable to leave the place where their lives were cut short. Even now I can't forget their faces or the sound of their laughter. It's haunting in its own way, not terrifying, but profoundly sad. The Phantom Children of Gettysburg aren't just ghosts, they're reminders of the innocence lost to war. And though I've returned to Gettysburg since that night, I've never again strayed from the group. Some echoes of the past are best left undisturbed. Photography has always been my escape. There's something calming about capturing the beauty of a place through the lens, especially when I'm alone. That's why I found myself at Château de Brissac, a towering relic of French history, early one misty morning. I had heard it was breathtakingly beautiful, but also shrouded in tales of the paranormal. Local legend spoke of a spirit called La Dame Verte, or the Green Lady. I wasn't one to believe in ghosts, but the stories intrigued me. As I arrived, the chateau stood silent and imposing, its turrets piercing the foggy sky. Faint and distant, as if whispering secrets. There wasn't another soul around, and the stillness was almost suffocating. Something about the air felt heavy, charged, like the calm before a storm. Inside, the high chateau was a labyrinth of ornate halls and shadowed corridors. My footsteps echoed. As I wandered, camera in hand, pausing to capture the intricate details of the carved woodwork and faded tapestries. Every now and then I thought I heard faint whispers, but I dismissed them as tricks of my imagination. As I turned a corner into a particularly dim corridor, I froze. A sound, soft, mournful, was emanating from somewhere ahead. It was unmistakable. Sobbing, the kind that makes your chest tighten in sympathy, yet chills your spine. The sound drew me to a door at the far end of the hallway. It was slightly ajar, revealing only darkness beyond. My pulse quickened, but curiosity got the better of me. Slowly, I pushed the door open. The room was dimly lit by a single window, its curtains half drawn. In the centre stood an old chaise lounge, and on it sat a woman in an elaborate green gown. Her head was bowed, her face obscured by a delicate veil. She looked like she belonged to another era, as if time had forgotten her. "Madame," I called softly, my voice trembling. She didn't respond. The sobbing had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. Summoning courage, I took a cautious step closer. "Do you need help?" I asked again. This time she moved. Slowly, deliberately, she turned her head toward me. My breath caught in my throat. Beneath the veil was a face I will never forget. Her skin was gaunt and grey, her features grotesquely hollowed. Where her eyes should have been, there were only two black voids, bottomless and horrifying. A cold, unnatural wind swept through the room, and my legs felt as though they would buckle beneath me. I stumbled backward, dropping my camera as I turned and fled. The sound of her mournful wail followed me down the hall, echoing in my ears even as I burst. Out into the open air, I didn't stop running until I was far from the chateau, my chest heaving and my mind racing. It was only later, when I had calmed down, that I realized I had left my camera behind. Even if I had been brave enough to go back, I knew I couldn't face her again. When I recounted my experience to the locals, they nodded knowingly. One older man told me, "You saw La Dame Verte. She appears to those who dare to enter her domain alone." He went on to explain that she had been a noblewoman, murdered by her jealous husband centuries ago after he discovered her infidelity. Her spirit, they said, roams the chateau, mourning her tragic fate. The Green Lady was Charlotte de Brissac, the illegitimate daughter of King Charles VII. Her marriage to Jacques de Brissac was one of convenience, not love. When Jacques discovered her affair with another man, his rage consumed him. One fateful night, he murdered both Charlotte and her lover in the chateau, leaving their blood to stain its walls. It is said that Charlotte's spirit remains bound to the chateau, her grief and pain tethering her to the place of her demise. Some believe her appearances are a warning, while others see them as a plea for understanding, a cry for someone to acknowledge her suffering and bring her peace. Though
I escaped that day, the memory of Madame Vertu haunts me still.
sometimes I wonder if she was trying to communicate, to share her story. Perhaps she remains at Château de Brissac not just as a spirit of sorrow, but as a reminder of the cruelty she endured. Haven't returned to the chateau, and I doubt I ever will. But every time I hear the faint sound of someone crying, I can't help but wonder, is it just my imagination, or is she still out there, waiting? It was a summer evening when I decided to visit the Tower of London. I'd always been fascinated by the dark history of the place, tales of betrayal, executions, and, of course, the ghosts said to haunt its walls. As the sun dipped below, casting long shadows across the cobblestones, our guide began recounting chilling stories about the site. Something about the way he described the Salt Tower caught my attention. Many say it's the most haunted part of the tower, he whispered. If you linger too long, you might encounter the Watchman. The group chuckled nervously, but a cold shiver ran down my spine. I wasn't sure if it was the guide's tone or the eerie silence settling over the area, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something awaited me. The tour moved on, but I stayed back near the Salt Tower, drawn by an inexplicable urge.
These sheet of ancient stone walls loomed large, their surface scarred by time and history.
As I took out my camera to capture the scene, the air grew unnaturally cold, biting through my jacket. A faint sound reached my ears, the soft clink of metal, like keys jingling. It grew louder, rhythmic, like the purposeful steps of someone pacing. I turned, expecting to see another tourist, but the courtyard was empty. The shadows seemed to deepen, pressing in around me, and I felt utterly alone. And then I saw him. At first, he was just a silhouette, standing a few feet away. As he stepped closer, the flickering light from a nearby lantern illuminated his figure. He was dressed in an old-fashioned guard's uniform, a Yeoman Warder, complete with a long cape and a wide-brimmed hat. His face was pale, and his eyes bore an intensity that froze me in place. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice low and commanding. But it wasn't his words that terrified me. It was the way his breath seemed to hang in the air, visible even though the night wasn't. Cold enough for it. I stammered an apology, but he didn't react. Instead, he pointed towards the tower's entrance. Before I could respond, he vanished. One moment, he was there, and the next, he dissolved into the shadows. The air felt heavier, and an overwhelming sense of dread washed over me. I clutched my camera and hurried to rejoin the group, my heart pounding in my chest. When I finally caught up with the others, the guide noticed my pale face and trembling hands. I told him what I had seen, half expecting him to dismiss it. Instead, his expression darkened. "You saw him, didn't you? The Watchman." He explained that many visitors had reported similar sightings over the years, always near the Salt Tower. Some believed the Watchman's spirit was trapped, eternally guarding the tower he had sworn to protect. I showed the guide the photos I had taken, and one of them made my blood run cold. In the corner of the frame was a shadowy figure, faint but unmistakable, standing exactly where I had seen the Watchman. The guide shared the Watchman's tragic tale. During the reign of Henry, the Yeoman Warder had been accused of aiding a prisoner's escape. Though evidence suggested his innocence, he was executed for treason. His final words were a vow to guard the tower for eternity, a promise he seemed to have kept. The Salt Tower, where he was stationed in life, became the epicenter of his hauntings. Some say his restless spirit seeks to clear his name, while others believe he's simply carrying out his duty, ensuring the tower's secrets remain safe. The experience left me shaken but intrigued. I began researching ways to help spirits find peace and eventually reached out to a paranormal investigator. Together we conducted a small ritual near the Salt Tower, leaving offerings and reciting words meant to honor the Watchman's service. While I can't say for certain if it worked, the next time I visited, the air felt lighter and the oppressive sense of dread was gone. Even so, I couldn't help but wonder, is the Watchman truly at rest, or is he still there, silently watching, protecting the tower he loved so dearly?